when I was 17, I was driving to work on a Sunday morning in my dad's car. It was a very quiet, early 7:45 Sunday morning, virtually no other cars on the road. And the route I was travelling, there was a very steep hill that I had to climb up, and there was a crossroad at the top of the hill. And on the right was a taxi waiting to pull out. And I got concerned that this taxi was going to pull out in front of me, and so I was really kind of fixated on him. And he didn't pull out, so I, passed him. Of course, with because I was climbing a steep hill, my accelerator was pretty flat on the floor. And then, even after passing him, I was still concerned about what he was doing, and so I kept my foot flat on the floor because I wanted to pull away from him for no good reason. It's just something I felt I needed to do. And I was watching him in my rear vision mirror, and it was only when I saw him pull behind me that I then looked in front of me, and directly in front of me, 3/4 of the way across the road on a pedestrian crossing, was an elderly woman. 2 years after Margaret's death, almost immediately after she died, the question arose for me, do I have the right to continue living now that I've caused a death? And after 2 years of being haunted by that question, I admitted myself for psychiatric care. And after 12 weeks as a resident, as an inpatient, I finally found that the answer was no, I didn't have the right to continue living. And the reason was I needed to say how sorry I was personally to Margaret. And the only way I could do that was to join her. So I very carefully planned my death and was at least partially successful. I wasn't alive when discovered, but was resuscitated, and then spent 3 days in a coma in intensive care. And when I regained consciousness, howled in distress and anger and despair to find myself still alive, and so was committed. And after 2 weeks on a locked ward, I came to the realization that if I was going to get out of there, I had to play the game. I had to learn to play by their rules, which said, pretend it didn't happen, pretend everything is okay, keep your mouth shut and just get on with life. And I somehow convinced them that I could do that. And then the next big, and then for the next 20 years, I tried to play that game. I tried to keep quiet and pretend everything was okay. I never spoke about it. And then a turning point came when my daughter was about 5, and I was doing a creative visualization exercise where in this process you could learn to wipe away any part of your life that you didn't want to be there. And so I was doing this exercise with the intention of wiping away this terrible event in my life. And in the process of doing it, I realized that if I wiped away that, I would have to wipe away everything that had happened in the time between. And that meant wiping away this beautiful daughter that I now had. And in that moment, I knew that I had to take hold of it. I had to embrace it. I had to say, I am who I am. I live the life that I live now because of that. Not holding that as something horrible in my life, but in fact something important in my life. And then the next big change really happened when my daughter was 14. And I knew, and she knew nothing about this whole part of my life. But when she was 14, I knew I had to tell her. I knew that if it remained a secret, it would corrupt our relationship. And so I told her. And that then began the process of living more openly with my past. I think the moment when I realised I could forgive myself was my daughter's response. Or rather, my daughter's very matter-of-fact acceptance of what had happened. It wasn't an especially big deal for her. What was a big deal for her was that I had attempted suicide. And for a couple of years afterwards, she remained, she was very nervous that I might have this suicidal tendency that she'd been unaware of. And she kept watching me, to see that that I wasn't going to, to make that choice again. But the accident itself was something she was very able to immediately forgive. And that was really when I started to ask myself, am I ready to forgive myself for this? And one of the, I was able to recognize that Margaret's death had given me the gift of realizing that life is sacred. All life is sacred. But it took a little bit longer before I could apply that to myself, And one day I literally, I remember asking myself the question, is my life sacred as well then? And it was a bit of a shock, to kind of, and when I could finally say, yeah, actually, it is. And then I was also able to say, I'm really grateful that I was resuscitated. Because I think for a long time I hadn't really, I hadn't expressed gratitude for that. I'd been resentful of it still for a long time. And then the next step was, can I forgive myself for causing such a violent death to an innocent person? And it's still, even now when I speak the words, my throat is tightening. It's physically there is a raging resistance to saying the words. Yes, I can and I do forgive myself for making that mistake.